Hello, everybody. I'm Avast. I'm joined with Jayne and with Lando as well from Off the Break, and obviously Jayne and I from Contested. And we are here sort of codifying our Valorant coverage with our first installment of our Valorant series, Before the Switch. So hopefully making it a little bit more, I guess, coalesced, a little bit more consistent. Now that the game's fully released and the tournament series hopefully going to be starting, we have like a live patch, everything's coming out, rolling out. So it's time for us to roll out as well with our Before the Switch. Got to throw it in a second time, so it really starts registering in their brains a little bit. You have to get it lodged in there. So how are you guys, by the way? We'll start with Jayne, I guess. How are you, Jayne?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. Excited for this one. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with the Valorant scene. We had the initial closed beta release a couple months ago, and a lot of things have been happening since then. We just had the actual full release a little while ago, and then Ranked just came out within the last couple of days. So, we're looking forward to the T1 tournament this weekend, which will be the first Tier A tournament that we've seen in the Valorant scene. And as of yet, we'll have to see where Valorant Esports is going. But regardless of where it goes, I'm going to be happy to be here covering it, talking about it both on the more casual side as well as once the esports scene gets rolling. A lot more on the competitive side as well.
And Lando, you've been streaming it a decent amount, haven't you? I've been catching your stream, and I think you've been doing a decent amount of streaming.
I've been trying to stream. I've been having some internet issues, much like yourself. But I've been trying to get into the game a little bit more. This game for me is a little bit new, I would say, in terms of like kind of what my background is. But much like Jayne, I'm really excited to kind of see the future of this game, to kind of see what the expectations are, and especially when it comes down to competitive, which I know will be a majority of the discussion that we have today.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the crux of the issue is where it lands at competitive level. But before we really talk about it on like a competitive level, I think we did have the first live patch. We haven't talked about it since it's gone live, actually. Yes. It's been a while since we've done any of that. Sure. So we haven't done it since it's gone live yet. But we've had more patches come out since it's actually gone live. And like you said earlier, Jayne, Ranked is also emerged finally because people were bitching about how they're not being ranked. There was no other way around it. People were not happy about their not being ranked, and also now even about the current ranked system, I would say, in a little bit.
People are going to bitch regardless of the situation, whether or not there's ranked or not. Before they're going to be complaining that there isn't ranked, and now they've got some legitimate reasons and other reasons that they're just going to complain because people are people. People
like to complain.
We saw the mixed queue is still a thing, so you have 5 stacks playing against mixed groups, higher level players in 30-minute queues. So, so far Riot's been really good about doing the development and pretty rapid patching, trying to improve things. We saw some map updates as well. But yeah, with the ranked experience come out, everyone was waiting for that. Especially a lot of the streamers, the pros wanted to be grinding up towards that new rank, which is now called Radiant instead of...
Yeah, they did. They did a quick rework of all the ranks as well. They changed the logos.
I can't lie, though. I'm a little bit disappointed you can't be called Valorant in Valorant. Like, that was like the ultimate epitome of just breaking a game in some capacity to be called the game itself. That for me was a little bit unfortunate. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit unfortunate.
It was nice to be called Valorant within Valorant, but I do think it fits the tone of what they're going for. Sure. It'd be better to have like the Radiant. And also, for myself in particular, speaking of the ranked issues and the 5 stacking and what they call it's like dynamic queue versus the solo and duo queue system, which is sort of what you see in games like Fortnite, is that there was a real big push for solos and for duos, and you have it in League of Legends too. And people are generally pretty happy about that. And then even for games like we've sort of changed it a bit in Overwatch, but I don't think COD doesn't really have like any sort of system like that, right?
No,
it's not really like that. So, but for Valorant people, a big complaint has been I can queue into essentially like the Gen G or the C9, like full Valorant squad or what they're trialing at the time. And I'm going to be placed with Bobby Basketball like 1992, and it's not going to be a fun time. And it's a real big issue, I think, to have like a dynamic queue versus a solo queue and a duo queue system. I mean, is that something you've ever experienced when you've been queuing? Is just running into the 5 stacks and getting demolished?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had my fair share of those moments, and I think the whole conversation around it gets kind of focused on Valorant. And the reason why we've seen, I think, so many arguments in relation, or rather complaints about the game, is just because of the amount of hype that exists around it. I mean, like, I don't think that if this was just your average title kind of coming through or another FPS that you'd obviously be having these same complaints, but I think that this game is being held to such high standard. I know we've kind of talked, previously in other shows about, the viewership and how that kind of impacts. I mean, everybody's eye is the spotlight is without question on Valorant, and so I think a lot of that kind of has to do with the complaining. I think some of it is justified, but at the same time, you also kind of have to realize the way the game is playing and stuff like that. But I will not lie, knowing that and saying that, I have run into my fair share of 5 stacks And I'm very glad that forfeiting is now an option. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, they did include that early forfeit option. So now if you can't forfeit before the 8th round, but
Which isn't that early, really.
No,
I
it's
think.
not
You
that
have to
early.
get stomped
It's
for a
still way earlier than 12.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So
Sure.
if things are really just like get me out of this game, at least you don't have to bang your head against the wall.
Are you an anti like flex queue, or are you like pro flex queue of like the option, or I should say dynamic queue? Like, are you cool? Because I myself, I'm gonna make my stand. I'm not dynamic. I hate dynamic queue. I think it's really bad, especially in a game like Valorant and even like other games like Overwatch, which we have a lot of experience in. I don't enjoy it. Are you sort of like push it towards a solo duo queue system, or are you more of like a let's keep it dynamic?
Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be a separate, just like in Overwatch. If you take a team of 6 people and put them against 6 randoms, the team of 6 people are going to win absolutely every single time. And I definitely think that the problems are probably going to be a little bit exacerbated right now from the lack of a proper esports scene. You know, the knowledge about which teams are good, which teams are kind of going to be worth scrimming in preparation for tournaments isn't there right now. So a lot of these teams, you are going to see these people like the Gen G squads or fully formed esports teams or want to be esports teams queuing and ranked. They want to be winning as much as possible, especially when you're going for people trying to be free agents to get picked up. You know, like Cloud9, for example, they still only have 2 people on their roster. They're still looking for more people to sign. There's a lot of esports teams out there, you know, like Lando said. Hype for this game is massive. And how are you going to get noticed? You know, there's a lot of ways to get noticed, but it's going to be very clearly be very high rank. So, you know, if you're not quite the ability to get their solo queue, even if you can get their solo queue, it's probably more consistent to get to that rank using a 5-stack, just absolutely smashing other people. So that motivation is there. The lack of scrim infrastructure to actually find competitive teams for esports teams to practice off those things in customs, not quite there yet either. So there's a lot of reasons that's making this dynamic queue worse than it will be over time. Like these things will smooth out. The hype about like, oh, I'm Radiant first. You know, Food hit Radiant first in NA 2 hours ago or something like that, right before we went live. But those things will settle out. Regardless of that, though, regardless of the things that are making the problem worse, it's still a problem even when these things aren't a factor. So you definitely want to have those solo queues and those duo queues because at the end of the day, it's a game that people want to have fun with. And just completely getting outclassed and getting smashed, especially for something outside of your control, like, you know, having friends is a competitive advantage, but...
It's nice to queue versus and be in a group queue versus not be in a group queue. And also a host with all these ranked updates, they've released a bunch of just because we're on patch 1.02 now.
Yes.
They've released a bunch of agent updates. I want to say hero, they're not hero updates. You know, I'm letting Overwatch bleed into my vocab a little bit, but they're agent updates. And I think the biggest one for me, and I don't know what you typically played. What did you typically play, like agent-wise, Lando?
It kind of changed up a
varied
little
around.
bit. I mean, there wasn't really one specific I would say that I kind of instantly led to. I mean, Reyna was one that I was like wanting to hop on instantly once that came out. But
how do you feel about Reyna, by the way? Because we get a chance to talk about her. Reyna was pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah,
on her
definitely.
when she came out because some people were like. They were watching these clips from like, you know, there's all the YouTube channels like Pro Valorant Best Moments, Funny, WTF, like, Epic. And that's like, so there's those collections of like streamers, you know, like Mixwell or Shroud or things like that.
Sure.
You know, hopping on Reyna and just dominating because it's sort of like one of those feast or famine characters. For someone that's played it, what's obviously not, you know, going to that more professional, high level,
right.
Like, how do you feel as Reyna?
I mean, I would say like, it was instantly pretty well felt. Like as soon as I kind of hopped in the game and started to kind of play consistently, and this is probably like, I don't know, maybe 2 days of game time, it was pretty easy to tell off of the abilities, the way that the character plays, that you kind of have a lot of flexibility. Like you have the ability, I mean, in a number of different situations, I kept finding
You think she has a lot of flexibility?
Well,
really?
I'll say flexibility in terms of like when you were in the middle of a round and you were relied upon to do a specific act, I felt like she had the ability to do that. And so I think that the core components behind her character or her agent, I know we're kind of going back and forth on that, but on the terminology, but I just felt like whenever I was in a game with her, I just felt always enabled and almost kind of had, in certain ways, a higher advantage in comparison to other characters. So for me, it was like, in terms of early playtime, it already felt for me at different moments that I was at an advantage versus other players who were either didn't have her unlocked or things like that.
You would think so. You would think it's an advantage because, you know, I should rather say you think it's an advantage because I find it interesting that you find that you're advantageous to be on Reyna because she's sort of, like I said, a feast or famine character.
Sure.
And a lot of people levied complaints of like how this is not great game design typically because of the fact that like feast or famine. Like, how do you balance a character in a multiplayer game where there's going to be inherent skill disparities, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's just like, if you do nothing, you are useless. Like, your team might as well hit the surrender button that there is there. But if you pop off, then it's sort of oppressive almost, and it's really tough to find that medium.
Sure.
So I always felt that Reina was going to have like a problem from like a perspective. Like, obviously in a pro level, it seems like she's relatively balanced because there's always going to be the coordination to work around sort of that individual playmaking. But I feel like at a pub level, and when we get into like the open ranked like range, it's definitely a lot more frustrating to play against when you have a character.
Yeah, this is certainly similar to the Overwatch experience, where 2 points here, I guess. The first one is going to be that whenever you have a character like that introduced, a very high skill ceiling or a low skill floor, any of those, they are going to have a difference in terms of how they're balanced at pro and how they're balanced for the pugs. So I don't really actually know how Riot is going to be approaching this game. Is Riot going to try and make this game super casual friendly?
No, definitely. I think they're planning to make it super vertically integrated. And that's been their plan the entire time. Is pro first, and it trickles down into everything else, like Dota.
I don't know about that, though.
You don't think so?
I'm not.
I feel like that's their ideology.
It's like if I'm looking at Riot, first of all, they didn't even have a plan for like an esports scene for quite a significant period of time, and with it being as hyped up as it has been, they've rumored to be moving up those plans quite a bit. But if you look at their other titles like League of Legends as well, League of Legends, despite having a very, very successful pro scene, is a massively popular casual game as well. And I was very interested in seeing specifically kind of how the social media around Valorant has been coming out. And we're going to get to talking to the T1 tournament later on, but this happens a lot in like the comparison between Riot's title League of Legends and then Blizzard's title Overwatch. Now, the main Overwatch subreddit is purely casual. They've tried a whole bunch of times to change it, but it's always like clips of gold, people kind of getting 6Ks with Diva, just like any competitively minded person doesn't ever read the main Overwatch subreddit. It's just not a thing. And if you look at the Valorant subreddit, it's actually becoming the same sort of thing. It's not trending towards the more esports, more serious focus mindset. There is actually being quite a lot of casual content and casual interest in Valorant, to the point where the T1 tournament, which is this big, it's the first A-tier tournament we've seen in the game so far. We're seeing.
Well, technically, I think they did have them for like Europe, and they were going to have one for North America, or North Africa, and they had one in Japan as well. But you mean for an NA? For NA, for sure. Yeah, this is their first 100%.
But there's zero discussion of it, zero hype of it on the main subreddit.
There's zero?
Zero. I looked.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I went to top of the week, and there's just like, they're not talking about it. Yeah, go ahead. I was doing my research, so.
That's crazy.
But yeah, there's a ton of people making jokes about placing an iron, like, and then if you kind of.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, like I'm telling you,
wow,
the Valorant community is way, way more casual than I had thought, and this is really surprising to me, especially since it's a CS:GO game. It's a tactical shooter. It's a lot heavier on the mechanic side. You can justify that a lot easier in the Overwatch world, where Overwatch is not very reliant on aim, but regardless of which character you play in Valorant, you still have to aim, right? Yeah. There's no Moira, there's no Winston where it's like, and you still win games, right? So that's just, that was a hell of a tangent. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is that like the community is surprisingly casual, and there was when we're coming up to this tournament, really, the first post I sorted to top of the week, trying to find like what is the very first post that is actually talking about the competitive scene in Valorant. And the first post that I found was actually complaining about the competitive scene in Valorant.
Really?
Yeah. So
does that happen on the Overwatch Reddit?
On r/Overwatch, yes.
Yeah, and on the Overwatch forums, like they almost are actively distasteful against pros. They think that pros
they ruin the game.
They ruin the game. Their balance suggestions are just bad. They are tyrannical.
They keep on ruining my favorite hero.
Yeah, so it's like it's almost like
sure.
It is. There's very much an anti-pro, anti-competitive sentiment because at least in the casual viewer base, they view it as developers who cater towards the pros. They ruin the game and they ruin it for the casuals. And we're the largest population. But yeah, and the pro world is not the greatest. We don't have the best tools for the competitive spectating, like the scrim tools. You and I casted a tournament.
Oh, I think there are people, there's a very notable observer, and he does a lot of CSGO work. His name is Jason Baker, his Meister, and he has just been very vocal, along with some of the emerging people that are doing broadcasts. Just like, please give us spectator tools, Riot.
Yeah, like,
please.
There's
give
no
us
spectator tools. The thing bugs out like crazy. You know, there's a lot of things that really do need to be developed because right now, you know, the spectator experience is not great. You know, with the lack of tools, with the actual way that they have. You know, there is a tournament, the qualifier. Again, I'm going to bring this up, but like the Tier 1 tournament, which we haven't even started talking
yes,
about. Right?
it has to be pushed towards the end. But
It's going to be right at the end. So we had one of the qualifiers for the tournament, right? Can enable cheats in the custom game so that you can like fire off mollies and get those like set spots for smokes or whatever. And in a qualifying tournament for this 50,000 T1 tournament, one of the players activated NoClip in the middle of a $50,000 qualifier tournament.
like, but I'm assuming by accident.
Yes,
probably.
by accident.
Yeah.
But still,
that would imply that do you have to be lobby lead or something for that to happen? Like, how do you like? I don't even know. I honestly don't know enough because I haven't set up enough lobbies myself to even know exactly. But that's still crazy to even think about, especially when you compare it to just in general. Like, because I mean, like, surprisingly casual for a game that is looking to be so competitive oriented.
Yeah, like at least in the way that it is branded or marketed. I would have expected this to move much more towards the harder core side of the gaming world, but it does not seem to be the case. Maybe the casuals won't stick around. Maybe they'll start getting better, but you know, it seems to be a lot of the posts, you know, and it is probably a good community mindset to have, but there is a lot of kind of joking, and people are coming over to this game, you know, because it's a Riot game. A lot of people are coming over from League, and League is not an FPS. FPS mechanics do not trend. Like, like no matter how good you are at League, aiming in a 3D environment, different ball game. I've met a lot of people who are very highly ranked in League of Legends who just, you know, they're like iron, silver. But the community around Valorant so far seems to be kind of just like joking about how bad they are and still having fun, you know, especially with the balance sort of thing. It can be oppressive, like Reyna, which is what we originally started on. Is that Reyna can certainly be oppressive.
Circled the bit.
We have
circled the wagons a bit.
This was a huge tangent, but yeah, it can be oppressive if you're against a good player, but as long as the ranked system does well enough that you can kind of move people as close to that 50% win rate as possible and give people that dopamine high of, and occasionally you do manage to hit an op or something. Like, as long as, you know, the time to kills at the pro level is like you make a mistake, like boom, you're dead.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just like your headshot. Playing against those kind of guys early on, like that feels oppressive. More oppressive than the characters is playing against oppressive gunplay and mechanics. Like I'm sure you've had games when there wasn't ranked where there's just one guy who's just unstoppable. He just like.
I mean, that is true that you can get your way out of balance a lot more for pure FPS style games because of the fact that it's at the end of the day you just shoot the enemies.
Just shoot them in the head.
And if you just shoot them, then you will win. So
Yeah,
I guess
right.
that is. But I feel like still that there is an element of character design for like a tactical shooter, and they have had all these changes happen to them because they've already adjusted Reyna a little bit, though mostly pretty minor things for her.
Sure.
But even for like Viper, which was like on release, this new 1.02 patch they run. Viper was sort of seen as like a very like niche pick. Like people didn't feel like she did anything better than a lot of the other like controller-based heroes, like sort of like, you know, Brimstone, who's able to smoke properly. But they updated it to where now she can send her wall all over the map. They reduced her like sort of her one-way smokes a little bit, like they increased the cooldown for the poison cloud. But they also gave her some extra synergy with their acid pools, like called the snake bite. I mean, everyone picks up their own names for it. Like, technically, you're supposed to have the Valorant names, like it's snake bite, but like I just call it the acid pool.
That takes so much effort.
Whatever it may be.
Molly,
and now it
you know,
doubles damage.
right.
But I do think it's interesting for Valorant as sort of like an FPS-centered game that we have to worry about balance too. Because you know who's been constantly nerfed and is still 100% in the meta, both in pro and generally in casual, is Sage. Because you can heal and you can res and you can build a wall. You can alter map geometry.
Right.
So Lando, from your perspective, is like obviously very FPS-centric background.
Sure.
But this is different because it's an attack shooter a little bit in like Call of Duty style.
Oh, absolutely.
And you see these changes that are happening to make characters more viable, but they're almost always centered. The viability for someone like Viper is centered around the fact that it's controlling more map. It's doing more synergy for controlling the map and controlling information, which is sort of what the attack shooter genre is like all about, really. But you still have Sage that can res, that can heal. Is this really at its core something that can ever be like fixed or moderated in a sense, like where it's ever truly balanced because of the fact that these characters like Sage and now Viper, and even with the Omen changes, because they drastically changed Omen too, where his smokes are so much more consistent, I feel now.
Love it.
And a lot easier to use. But it's just like, is this something that really, when you can build a wall on the map, is that something that can ever actually be nerfed out of existence without just nerfing the character into the ground?
I think that's the biggest question that I have on this game in general is, and I think we discussed this on the first
A little bit, yeah, I think
kind of
we did.
a little bit on the first time we ever kind of talked about Valorant in general, was like my concern. I would say my biggest concern is how are they going to handle, which I know that the number of agents is still questionable in terms of how many there are going to be, how are those going to be readily acceptable, things like that. But my biggest thing was like, how are we going to handle on this level, and based on what is a Counter-Strike blueprint, if you will. I mean, like I said,
and most of the community also for Valorant so far, especially in the pro level, are Counter-Strike players.
Right,
and
exactly.
old tier 2 Counter-Strike
and
players.
so it's like, if you have those kind of people in this game mixed in with abilities, and like I said, I come from a game previously that has tried to add in abilities, and the biggest problem that they had was map design. It was properly trying to handle these new characters that they had added into the game, and the problem that they ran into, which is this won't necessarily be the same issue with Valorant, is that they have a year. And so the problem that they ran into was that by the time that everyone was interested in continuing to play the game, it was already over, and like all their interest was gone already because of the lack of ability when it comes down to it. So my worry, and I think the continuous conversation that we're going to have kind of throughout the year and throughout the remainder of Valorant's life cycle, if you will, and competitive, is can they do that? Is it viable? Is it possible for them to continually manage to tone these characters, to properly nerf and adjust them to the point where they are all accurately viable, which in a perfect world, is going to happen. But in Valorant, it's not going to be the case.
Yes.
Like, you're not going to have the perfect meta of which every character is properly utilized, as you guys are very familiar with an Overwatch.
Very familiar.
Yeah, very familiar with Overwatch. But that for me is going to be so interesting, and I think a lot of that is going to decide the future of how this game is accepted. And that could also be the uniting factor, not to go back to this major circle of which we've come back to.
Oh,
where
we
are
love
now.
circling.
We love
only
circling.
circle here.
That could be the factor that unites the kind of the amateur side versus the competitive side, is how you unite these characters and how they kind of work synergy-wise.
And they've already touched also on this patch. They touched again the sight lines and like the corners a bit of certain
Yes.
maps. Like in particular, I think it was Haven.
Yeah.
They looked at. They also, I don't think they touched Ascent necessarily, but it was Ascent actually. So pretty much every map they went and changed a bit of the corner geometry, which is like when we once again circle.
Yep.
Because we must circle here
Yes.
always at every point is really how do you balance I thought you were about to start I thought he was about to walk off because he was done with circles, but how do you get around the fact that their side, the developer's side of reasoning for this too, is that they wanted to stop these sort of crazy just clutter fights where everyone throws the utility at once. And in particular, let's take, for example, Haven B, which is some of the corners they touched. And when you try to enter that site, you have Sages walking in, building the wall.
Sure.
You have Omens or Brimstones dropping triple smokes, mollies, you flashing in. It's just it's like a fireworks show almost in a way.
Yeah.
Where everyone is utilizing their utility at once. And there's like, okay, we want to adjust our map geometry right off the bat, and they're probably going to continue to do so to stop wholesale utility usage. But I just don't ever see that being like a thing that's going to happen,
Yeah.
because of the fact that like at the end of the day, unless you change the geometry where it's just like a flat surface and you walk into it and there's no cover, there's nowhere at all, and it's sort of designed to have a defense, you're just going to drop all of your smokes and all of your not all, but like a lot, no matter what generally, and drop your wall to ensure you have a fresh entry. Now, there are some conditions with professional play, like what utility have they used, how many smokes have they used, things like that. But with characters like Omen re-entering the meta, Omen just has cooldown smokes. So there isn't really sort of a, you've used a smoke, now I get to enter a site much more easily and have to worry about less like
You get a
line of
smoke,
sight.
and you get a
I don't know
smoke,
how you
and
ever
you get a
really
smoke.
properly deal with the fact that like you sort of just have to, as an attacking team in particular, how you don't just always drop your utility walking into a site.
And this is a big difference between Valorant and Overwatch. And in Overwatch, you do see this where you're wanting to trade, you're wanting to try and force cooldowns out of the opponent. But, in Overwatch, you can never use more than one cooldown immediately or anything like that. And then there is this going to be trade where if in Valorant, for example, if I use one of my abilities, the opponent doesn't want you to have that value for free. So they're going to use an ability of their own to counter that, and then you're like, oh, so I need my advantage, so you now use an ability. So it's like an N+1 where there's always going to be a benefit of somebody using one more ability to gain that advantage. You don't want to use too much to waste it, but you want to use just enough. It's kind of that sunk cost fallacy. If you've dropped 3 and the opponent drops 4, well, you don't want to waste your 3 abilities, so you're going to drop 2 more.
Right.
So I think especially in those areas where there's a lot of map control necessary, or you just need to fight in this one area, even if they're trying to make it so that ability usage is being spread out around the map, there's still going to be areas of the map that are just tactically superior to hold. And then, of course, the objectives themselves. If a spike gets planted before ability usage comes out, that point is going to just get spammed with abilities. You're never going to get it to the point where, especially if the spike is being planted or about to be planted, it's not like people are like, I'm going to hold on to my utility. It's just like, if you can get value out of it, go for that win. So, yeah, it's interesting to see them explicitly state a design paradigm like that, especially one that you and I, when we first read that, we looked at each other and we were going like, is that going to work?
and there are some professional intricacies to it. As defense in particular, you really want that, and that's part of the reason why Sage is still so good despite being nerfed so many times. That you want abilities that slow attackers. But I'm not really looking at it from an attacker perspective, because defense is generally just always doing the same thing, which is I'm dropping my utilities slowly over the round as the round ticks down until eventually we have the crescendo, the one fight with the side entry. But who's almost always saving a decent amount of utility is the attackers to throw all their utility in. I don't really see how generally most geometric map design is going to change that from that side.
And that's kind of my worry too, is so whenever we have this crescendo, is the amount of effects and the amount of things that are going on at once, not even from a commentary side, not even from a fan side, but as a player side, and obviously with you guys in Overwatch, you are very well experienced with this,
very well experienced.
But I almost feel as if you don't want to have that major fight where you are having, constant abilities being thrown, because not just from a fan, not just from a spectator side, but also from a player side, I feel like that's so hard to regulate, and it almost comes to the point where you have so many different cards, it's just a matter of hey, which one got thrown first, which one got thrown last. I'm worried about that, and I think with a few of these changes in regards to the map design, I was happy with a majority of them, but there were some, for example, I think it was Garage on Haven. That little corner is so important to have. I think it was on the left side when you're on defense. Blocking out that corner then allows for one less piece of utility that now the offense is going to have for the future, and that's my
to then use on the site later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that kind of cuts off a major portion of the map, which we can get into in another time. But that very much hurts the defense. Why? Because now you have more abilities that can be used in the later stages of the round. So that's kind of my concern, was that I get what they were trying to do with these moves, but I worry for the cluster, if you will, that this could also lead to later on.
I'm of two minds of the situation. On the first point, it's when I'm looking at a tactical shooter, I'm kind of used to the overwhelming nature of all the abilities, ultimates, and visual effects coming out in Overwatch. And I do find Counter-Strike rather boring to watch, just straight up. And I think that when you do have increased the amount of abilities using on a point, it's going to be, like you said, it was hard to regulate. I thought that was an interesting word. But, the intricacies of understanding how all of these abilities interact and how you play around them, once pros start to get more familiar with those situations, you are going to see little kind of tactical decisions or outplays. It does create more novel situations where pros have to adapt and make decisions that are going to, either fail spectacularly or they're going to win gloriously, one or the other. But on the other hand, CSGO has none of that, and it's still a very successful both esport and just game in general. So, I don't think that there's any right answer one way or the other, but it is going to be kind of what Riot wants to do, I guess.
Yeah, and especially with the spectator tools, I think, as we get into, because there's likely going to be much more visual clutter on average for Valorant than CSGO.
100%.
We'll have to see how the spectate tools develop around that and what they can do, because for the most part, though, looking at our current patch, I do like the surrender option, because there are times you get stomped. I do think the updates to Viper are great, to make her overall more viable. They've pretty much changed the consistency around Phoenix's ult and, being able to get an orb or being able to refresh your Knives' jet when you finish off his ult, or his run it back, as it's called. Not his, I call it his ult. It is his ult, but, you have to use the proper name sometimes. But I think, if all things considered, I'm pretty happy with the current, where they're pushing the updates. I'm just interested to see, at its base core, will these solve any of the issues they're talking about? And one of the other issues that we really should talk about a bit, and spend a little bit of time, because we spent a decent amount of time on this, is skin pricing.
Oh, yes.
Because skin prices are kind of monumental in this game.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I did think from an outside perspective, it was really funny from like, from me, from the Overwatch community. I don't know what your perspective with the Call of Duty community was, but people were like, oh, Riot, like they're so good with their community and their balance and their competitive integrity and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, that doesn't sound right. I feel like League of Legends has a lot of things to say about Riot's philosophy on a lot of stuff.
That sounds like that sounds like things that people who don't play League of Legends would say.
It's always the grass.
Grass is
greener.
always greener. If you play Overwatch,
don't get
you
me
want
wrong,
to have
they have
Riot.
great I think they are trying to be very focused with where they're pushing it. But then one of the things that really came to the fore was skin pricing, and they had a bundle. It was like the Prime Skin bundle, and for all the skins, I think it was like around 7. You would pay close to $71, and I think that was for the bundle price because individually it's like $14 a piece, and that's more than a full price game, which is kind of personally I think we once again we're into the weeds of like, well, they're cosmetic, you don't have to buy them, but for myself I still think that's a little high. Do you think that's a little high?
I would say, like, whenever I was first like reading the discussions about this, my instant reaction was like, wait, is this actually like the real prices? I thought, like, my personal opinion instantly was too high. At the same time, and I'll say this, I do in some ways realize where they're coming from, because from an FPS background, and even Counter-Strike, different games, different FPSs, they rely on things that are pretty, right? They rely on skins, they rely on camos, things like that to kind of sell the game. So do I understand the high influx of price? Yes. Do I understand $70? I think it's a little high.
There are no loot boxes, right?
Yeah.
There are no loot boxes like in CS.
Sure.
So you can sort of directly buy them. But still, it's like, compared to like, because I think you've played it reasonable on a League, so you've obviously have experience with like the skins and such, is that at least with League skins, everyone sees them, including yourself. Like, and you interact with them on like a global basis. But for Valorant, it's sort of just you interacting with the skin. And like, sure, other people can pick up the gun and such, but they don't own it.
Yep.
And that's just a lot. For $71 for 7 skins just seems like a lot when it doesn't give you any extra like work.
I'm going to take a much different perspective on this entire
Okay.
argument. I think we're talking about like what should Riot do, but really like should doesn't really come into it. And I think if any company in the entire
What I should force them to do.
well, it's what they can do or what they're going to be doing from a business perspective. Really, I would assume that Riot is probably the most experienced company in the world when it comes to microtransactions. Like,
think so over like Valve, who designed like a whole. I mean, they put in like the Greek finance ministry. Now, granted, the country of Greece didn't do the best with economics. So I mean, I don't know.
yeah,
But
I mean, the only people who might be even better than Riot at understanding microtransactions and kind of human behavior in that regard might be like the people who make those ridiculously pay-to-win mobile games.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it is incredible how much money people will drop on games, right? And if you make a skin bundle, $70, which especially in the mobile world is not that high. Like, bundles on mobile games easily go into the hundreds of dollars.
Yes.
Easily.
Oh, yeah.
So, like,
they're all anime games too.
yeah.
They're called like gotcha games
Gotcha
or something.
games,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know what it is, but yeah, go on.
But so the point is that like people are very willing to spend that much money. And there's also the point where if you're going to be having a lower price point, let's say we made all the skin bundles like $30 and more people bought them. If they can actually kind of move that price point up to the $70 and people are still going to buy it, or they're going to make the same amount of money from selling that, they also just make it more exclusive. They make it more desirable. The fact that people can't actually buy those makes the skins inherently more valuable to those who actually do. It's called a Veblen good in that regard. So I think it's very strange in arguing about what a company should do as if you're coming from a moral perspective. They have no moral imperative to make sure that these skins are accessible. It's something that the game is free. It's not a pay-to-win mechanics. These are completely cosmetics. And if somebody is going to invest a lot of hours into it, maybe they're going to be thankful or grateful, and they want to pay as if they paid for a full game. That's certainly one way that people justify spending a lot of money, is that not that they want that item, but it's that they want to be grateful for Riot for having developed this game and having released it for free. So you have a lot of these differing motivations for why these skin prices are the way they are. But I think that their approach, at least in terms of the higher skin, and like the skins they're not just reskins, like the axe.
No, they're relatively nice.
They are relatively
skins.
nice.
Yeah,
and
for
they
sure.
put some effort into it.
Sure.
And it's not low effort. Now, when we're looking into, we're going to go away from kind of like that sort of world and into what they're doing with like the battle pass and the multiple currencies and making things kind of like once you already have a skin, forcing you to purchase in order to upgrade it using a different currency as well. That's where we're getting into things that become a little bit more in terms of like predatory practices and, you know, the dark art of human psychology sort of thing. But so that part I'm a little bit sketchier on, but just the raw $70 skins, you know, they put effort into them. They're making them more exclusive. People are buying them.
Then it works out, right?
It works.
I mean,
I don't blame them by any means.
No,
like, I
don't
don't blame them for the idea of it, and I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I'm curious, like, I wonder if this will in any way, not necessarily hurt, but if like if we're talking about like the way that Valorant works in terms of like competitive versus amateurism, and the way that, you know, the average fan enjoys Valorant. I'm curious if like what that impact has. Like they see that $70 price, does that instantly turn them away? Is that something that wants to make them like feel more connected to Valorant?
Some people have publicly said that it turns them away a bit, but obviously there's plenty of others that don't.
Sure.
Right. So I do think there's like, and you can purchase the skins individually, so you don't have to pay $70 and get every skin. And I'm also in agreement with Jayne where it's cosmetic, doesn't affect the game.
Yeah.
But it just seems like a lot. But also, I'm sure they have it perfectly priced to where they have been able to calculate the maximum amount of value they will extract, especially since cosmetics in general are sort of based around, what is it, like the whales? I think is their name? Yeah, the whales, where like those are the guys that everyone, they're hunting because they're going to spend a ton of money. And then also, I guess I didn't even think about the fact about the skin upgrades with the radiant points too, which is a whole different level.
that is like, there was a very highly upvoted thread on Reddit called "This game's sleazy monetization is trying to toy with your brain. Don't fall prey to it." And like it sounds like a clickbait title, but it's absolutely true. You know, like companies like Riot it's the same thing with Facebook and Twitter, where they have teams of psychologists and data scientists trying to figure out how to maximize your attention. You know, these people have put a lot of research into making sure that they can maximize the amount of money that they can get out of you. So, yes, they absolutely use psychological trickery in order to actually get you to spend more money, especially with the imbalance. If you have to use two different currencies in order to buy something, right? And you sell, it's the whole hot dogs and hot dog buns things. You can't ever buy them in equal amounts. So they're doing that sort of thing, except with two different currencies, and then the upgrades. And then now this was Riot Swaggernaut said this about the Battle Pass. Now, this is comparing it to Fortnite's Battle Pass. And he said, our goal is that when you buy a Battle Pass, you buy it for the total value of it, rather than buying it as a way of getting enough currency to buy the next one. We want the Battle Pass to be the highest value product we offer, as well as a compelling experience. So, compared to any of the other Battle Passes, where if you buy it, it gives you the extra upgrade in currency, so that, you know, in the next season comes out, you can also buy that Battle Pass. And it's kind of just like, if you buy it, it gives you enough upgrades where you can kind of go for the next one, which is, some people expect that when they play games. This one, it's kind of like, you're going to be getting these values, and we do expect you to pay for it. You know, it's not a return in investment. It's not a reward for hardcore players. It's like, this is something that it will give you a more compelling experience. And, you know, maybe that becomes the point where that is the base game, or you really need to do that, or else you are kind of slowly getting locked out of the content. So this is also something that they could, over time, move things not to kind of like a pay-to-win concept, but like a reverse DLC.
Yes.
Where they're like stealing content from you. Where it's just like, oh yeah, the Battle Pass users are happy. What's wrong with you?
Because I feel like from Call of Duty as well, you know, focusing on that angle is like, it reminds me a bit of like of a less severe, I guess, of like the Call of Duty map packs. Where back in the day, I remember when I was obviously I'm not an active Call of Duty player as much anymore. Sure. But I remember back like in Modern Warfare 2 and the original Modern Warfares and all this, like when the map packs came up, it was like, you have to grab the map pack. If you don't, like, you can't play. And obviously cosmetic skins don't split you nearly as much as maps that you must purchase to play on with your friends. Yeah. But I do think it is a little bit more of just a more predatory practice, like you said. And obviously, like, we don't have to be like, Riot, you must listen to us, okay? Or I myself solo, will play in your game, you know? Like, because I won't. I'm reasonable enough to realize I don't have to purchase skins. Right. But it's just, for me, I've always thought it from, like, it's sort of like the thing of, like, why even bother with the it's like, sure, you're going to sacrifice a bit of money, but I guess unless Riot comes to me and says, like, hey, if we shave off $10, we lose $100 million over, like, a couple years, which if that's true, then I'm like, you know, well, I guess, like, maybe. But I feel like you could probably buy, like, so much goodwill and really not lose that much profit if you shave off a couple bucks on there. But Obviously, I don't have the numbers. I just feel like, for me, it seems easier than having to worry about all the people on Reddit reading at you. But also, what does it matter if Reddit's reading at you? You know?
That's
What
a
does
good
it
point.
matter?
That's a solid point to bring up. And to kind of go on the map discussion quickly with Call of Duty. Like I said, that was the biggest thing back then, I think, with that was it kind of did become kind of a predatory thing where it was like, hey, if you don't have this, then you are looked upon as, like, it almost kind of separated the community in a way.
Yeah.
Where it actually started to get pretty bad. Like where, and there was this big conversation about, and this was, you know, totally different at the time, but like Call of Duty's different deals with, you know, things like Sony and obviously with Xbox and Microsoft, and how that kind of all played out to the point where sometimes you would have the ability to play these maps early if you were on one console versus the other, and then along with that, it kind of split the community up to a point where it was like, hey, you are on the next labeled console, you're not on the preferred console playing on these maps, and it kind of became this issue of like who is technically the highest level of player, and I honestly think it kind of hurt the game for a very large period of time.
I mean, just from the outside looking in, I would say that's really bad, honestly.
No,
So
it definitely was. It did not. I mean, obviously, when you look at like transactions and how that kind of helped them over time, obviously they made tons of money off of it. But in terms of like what it did for the community, I think it's one of the main reasons why people have started to move on and look toward different things, was because of this idea of having to buy things to advance. And obviously different titles in Call of Duty, for those who are familiar with it, I mean, different titles have included pay-to-win things. They've experienced or trialed different things like that, and I think a majority of the time it hasn't worked out.
And I think I really just wanted to touch on this point at all, just because for me, it's like, why? You don't have to do this, but like, and you've obviously brought up it's logical to do so for them, really logical. But I'm just like, it doesn't have to be this bad because you're still going to make a lot of money. You might entice other people that won't buy anyways. It's just kind of that's just where I stand, because I don't really need but also I'm not Riot, so whatever.
Yeah. I got nothing wrong with a business making money.
Yeah.
I do kind of, when I am going to kind of take issue with, take a moral stance on, is those more predatory psychological manipulations, which companies absolutely do. And, we saw this last year with the whole, like gambling is obviously very heavily regulated, and that started moving in towards the loot box mechanics, where countries started just outlawing loot boxes because they are basically a form of gambling. So this is sort of thing that is proven that governments just in general push back against. So, which
is why they don't have loot boxes at all, because you just circumvent that entire argument. And like how it hurt CSGO too, where they removed like gambling, like they cut down on gambling a lot too. And it kind of like, I remember when that happened, because I was actually, it was like very early Overwatch 2. There were some CS orgs that were looking to branch out into it, like some minor ones trying to build a name for themselves. And this will relate to our next thing, because we get into the actual esports finally of the scene a bit. But like then they got cracked down for all the gambling, and they lost like 90% of their revenue. Yeah. And so like I guess it's easier just to not even touch those topics and just go around it entirely. But enough about loot boxes, enough about skins and stuff, because we've had enough about screaming into the void about that particular thing. Is that the real meat and potatoes of Valorant is the esports scene. That's where also I think it hinges upon where this game lands on the spectrum of, is it a success currently? Because there's been a lot of controversy around its Twitch drop-off and its viewership drop-off. And early tournaments, like those run by Immortals, those run by also, there was one before that, it's just slipping my mind, but pretty much there's been a lot of endemic orgs that ran some early tournaments. I think C9 ran, no, CLG ran, that's what it was. And the viewership's pretty meh. Like, not great. They had some other early tournaments too, like a Twitch Rivals, which is pretty expected when you launch a new game, as a Twitch Rivals of some sort. Yeah. And it hasn't been good, and it hasn't been fantastic for all the hype that was built around it. And you have to ask, like, if moving forward, if these tournaments don't blow viewership like crazy upwards, is this a worrying sign for the game?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. And I think that we can kind of look at historical trends. People see the massive numbers, like they had way over a million.
Yeah, they were. I mean, on Twitch
viewers
for a while, they were gigantic.
Yeah, and they've fallen down. They're sitting at around average 80,000 views right now. But if you kind of look at the size of those curves and everything, of course, everybody who tries a game out isn't going to stick for it long term. People have their kind of core game that they always go back to. Maybe they'll branch out for a bit, but usually people have kind of their comfort game that they return to. It's not like you're ever expected to have those 7-figure viewership numbers retained. And if you look at the 2 other games which are still alive and in fact growing, take a look at the trends from Apex Legends. Now, Apex Legends had a really unique launch strategy where they're like, by the way, game. and they just kind of just released a game, and everyone was like hyped out of their damn minds. And a whole bunch of streamers, again, partnered with them, which I think is becoming pretty much de facto industry standard for marketing release. It's just like pay all the influencers all the money to stream the game constantly until it's the biggest thing on Twitch. You're done. So, but when you are seeing this very dramatic decline, I think that's normal. You're waiting to see how many people you could actually convert over to becoming Valorant players, people who make Valorant their main game. And then if you're comparing it not just to Apex Legends, but to something like Rainbow Six Siege, a much older game than Apex Legends, but had a very similar interest at the start and then fell down. But ever since then, it has consistently been finding more and more viewers. Its esports scene has been growing. And this kind of consistent growth is kind of what's proven to keep esports scenes around. Capitalizing over the hype or trying to maintain that hype level, it's never historically worked. So I think this drop off in viewership, everybody's like, oh, the game is dying or the viewership is decreasing. It's like that should be expected. Really what you're looking for is kind of the rate of decline. You know, is it kind of just like completely falling off? Are you seeing people abandon it, want to play it? And as long as people are still having a kind of a core healthy group of people playing it, once you do have that esports scene, it can start growing again. And I'm just going to keep talking so you two can sit back and take a drink.
I mean, Jayne tangents are, this is where I sit back and I let my brain wander.
You just open it up and it just floods.
I like to keep it like a nice air vent, which I can either close and open and let the Jayne air flow through me, and then I have sort of absorb it a little bit. But I mean, it is something still for me, at least, because I will say that, like, yes, those are all great examples, but I wouldn't particularly argue that either of those games are trying to reach the state that Valorant wants to reach. Valorant came in and they're like, hey, by the way, assholes, like, we are going to be the biggest. Like, CSGO, what's that? That's for 40-year-olds. Like, we're hip, we're new, we're cool, everyone. Yeah. Like, we're gonna be the new tack shooter, and we're gonna be Riot, and we're gonna be dope, and it's gonna have all this cool stuff, and I mean, also their whole development team is a lot of old CS players, like actual professionals, that really from the get-go was like, this is going to be the esport, like the big one. This is the one that we're gonna grab, and for me, I agree that early trends, you can't expect to have like 1 million viewers on Twitch all the time. Like, not even Fortnite can do that. And Fortnite is literally just like it's almost like an assembly line of like,
I mean,
when a child is born,
Scott concert in the game.
When a child is born, they put on the conveyor belt to go consume Fortnite content at some point. So I do think that, like, obviously it's not comparable.
Right.
It's just when you hit the tournaments, do we get any sort of viewership to work? Because you also have to talk about the return on investment of like, what is going to make these orgs really want to stick around and create this, especially if there's a league in the future, which is a possibility of, you know, why you need to have some return on investment early if you're going to have this much hype behind it, you know?
Are you going to go?
No, we should let Lando's been
Lando, I
have very much, I feel like I'm watching an episode of Contested right now, which is great. I feel like I'm just engaging so much.
We're going to put Lando in the middle next time.
Yeah,
we're putting Lando in the middle next time.
Front seat tickets to the Contested show.
I will say, to kind of add on a few things, in terms of viewership right now, I think it is something to be aware of. In terms of like concern, I wouldn't be there yet. Obviously, the drop off in viewership for me hasn't been expected. I thought that it would be kind of more at a higher level, just granted because of, like you mentioned, like the way that they kind of stepped into the scene, the way that they kind of took over the driver's seat and said like, hey, we are Riot, this is what we've got going on right now, we're trying to be the FPS, and like you said, kind of throwing CSGO out
and
the
orgs
window.
Are clearly hyped about it too.
Absolutely.
And like that surprises me to say that you expected it to remain that high, because like not to
the same extent, but from an esports side, I expected the numbers to be higher given the hype around the title, and also
but we
given
haven't really
the fact
seen any esports.
We haven't, and that's the reason.
There's been some early tournaments.
I mean, that's the reason why I'm
kinda
not concerned, but I am aware of the current circumstances, and the reason why I thought that it would be slightly higher, if not averagely higher than it is right now, is because of the amount of hype, not just from the fans, but from the esports players themselves to say, you know what, I'm going to leave my current esport and go over to this game, despite not really having a whole lot of information on it. And so I think knowing that kind of generated around this hype circle that made me think, okay, this is going to be it. They're kind of taking over in a way that we haven't seen before.
I mean, we're very much in an ecosystem right now where everybody knows that esports is going to be the next big thing, but nobody knows which esport is going to be the next big thing. And whenever you kind of...
Or exactly how big.
Exactly
right?
how big it is, right? But, you know, I just wanted to make sure that we did hit one point in that, like, the initial Twitch viewerships for the closed beta
a lot of that was crazy inflated by the beta.
For sure.
kickoffs.
I did not expect that viewership to be consistent. 100%.
Oh, no.
okay.
Yeah.
Not that level by any means.
And the other thing about esports is that we're seeing these tournaments, but like the reason people watch the Overwatch League or League of Legends, like storylines. People watch for the human interest, the storylines behind teams, the players on them, how they go, and we don't have any of those yet.
We just have storylines for people that have already existed in other esports, like
Right.
CS or
Yeah,
Overwatch.
It's like the
and
melting
such.
pot of
Yeah.
like, how are they going to intertwine?
But really,
et
for
cetera.
that, you don't care about the actual games. You care about that individual. You can follow them on Twitter. You're still going to get that storyline. Actually, watching the tournaments, there's no competitive storyline yet. And you are kind of seeing the situation with, like, looking at the viewership numbers, comparing Valorant to Counter-Strike, CS:GO. So CS:GO does have a healthy esports scene, and just with the introduction, we talked about it in the pre-show, with Flashpoint and a lot of the other things that CS:GO are doing. They've actually pretty much doubled their numbers.
Do we have a pre-show for this?
Well, before the
It
show.
used to be before the show.
But
Right?
just
Okay, I
before
was
the
like,
show, we
I was like,
talked.
were we even recorded? I don't know. Okay, but go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so like CS:GO's viewership, along with its tournaments, has doubled. It's getting up close to about 300,000. So we are at the point where Valorant's viewership has decreased to the point where its average viewership is lower than CS:GO's. It's trending downwards. CS:GO is trending upwards. And when you're kind of looking at the explosion of Fortnite was for a lot, like everybody kind of knew that this genre existed. There was the DayZ, there was PUBG, there was another one which I'm completely forgetting.
H1Z1. Right?
I know
No,
that.
you said, didn't you say,
Yeah,
DayZ,
but there was
PUBG.
another
No,
popular-
H1Z1 is different than DayZ, though.
Oh, okay. News
Yeah.
to me.
Those are the three,
But
I
there,
guess.
there was
Yeah.
there was another.
There was like a bunch of, it was like the early zombie genre
Yes.
of survival.
Yeah.
Warzy?
Arma
I have
was
no
like the
idea.
precursor to all
Oh
of
my
those.
gosh.
But this
Yeah.
has existed a while. But all
Right.
of those games that were in that genre were kind of like half baked or indie developer or had some problems. And Fortnite kind of came in and they're just like, well, this is clearly popular. Let's actually do it right. Now I think the problem that Riot has is that CS:GO isn't in the state that like PUBG or H1Z1 or all of those are in. Like it's established. And if you're kind of looking at a sponsor here, maybe Riot has shot themselves in the foot and they've just made tactical shooters more popular. But if they don't have the most established esports scene or something, it's kind of like, CS:GO is still there and they have an uphill battle.
They'll let you know they're there.
Yeah.
Because they don't go anywhere. Without CSGO, people will be like, CSGO is the best game ever. I will sacrifice my firstborn for CSGO.
Yeah, but
Okay.
like CS:GO's viewership is nothing to scoff at. It's consistent. It's growing. Tactical shooter interest is up with the release of Valorant. So with these tournaments coming out, there's a lot of money being invested into that, but that's not enough. You got who are going to be the people who convert over to watching Valorant? You have, at least in the way that I live in this magical world of my understanding of esports, right? I feel like the amount of people who are fans of esports as a whole is pretty low. I find that people are usually fans of the game and then find the esport for that game when they get really invested into it. So are the people who watch Counter-Strike going to become fans of Valorant esports? Are the people who are watching the Overwatch League going to become a fan of Valorant esports? I think that for Valorant to be successful, they need to have that big casual viewer base and then convert those viewers into the viewers of Valorant esports. I don't think just as a whole, these esports ecosystems magically develop themselves. So in that regard, you do have to go through that grassroots, that painful, very slow burn of a process to grow up your scene. And with them being now behind CS:GO's viewership, where CS:GO's viewership is primarily coming from a lot of these tournaments, Valorant's viewership right now is almost exclusively coming from individual influencers, streamers, and it's on the decline. Like those tournaments are going to be behind the power curve in terms of picking up, and that's before what happens when the next big game comes out.
A great question. I mean, Lando, you sounded a little bit more. This guy sounded very negative over here, honestly. He sounded, but I mean, realistic. But how are you feeling? Like we haven't really touched upon it too much yet, but we want to. Is that the next big major tournament, which is going to be a pretty big leading factor, I think, for the game as a whole in the scene, is this T1 Invitational. It's part of the Ignition Series for Valorant. How are you feeling coming into that, and where do you think that it's sort of going to land and like project, Valorant moving forward, perhaps?
I mean, I think that this tournament in particular will kind of be looked upon as like the staple. Like I said, granted, the way that things have looked up to this point haven't been maybe what some people are thinking, or just regardless, the viewership hasn't been as high as many people would have assumed that it would have been, given maybe a number of different circumstances. But I think this one, with the initiative that they have put out, I think this will kind of be the one where people look at for the future and think, okay, this will be the actual I don't know the exact word to think about, but this will be kind of like the actual one that people look at and say, okay, this is where viewership is. This is the way that we need to look at this game for the future.
This is like the water line.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like, this is the one where if you weren't involved in the Valorant esports scene before, this is how you get integrated now. So I think this one in particular, with the fact of it being kind of labeled a higher one, I think this is the highest price.
I mean, yeah, this is one of the higher. I mean, they've had other Ignition Series tournaments in Europe as well.
Right.
They've had them in Japan. So I think they just finished up not too long ago. G2 won the first one, and that prize pool, I believe, was around the same-ish. I want to say it's like it was around 50-ish as well. But either way, it's still, this is our second really premier region that is taking place.
And I think that's the way that the teams are feeling about this as well. Like, I think the hype kind of around this event, given the prize pool, given the teams, the way the format works, I think this is kind of being looked upon as kind of a summary of what the early stages of Valorant has been for competitive.
Mm-hmm. And it does have a lot of the big names that have been missing for a bit. I mean, just for us, when we look at Overwatch specifically, I mean, Sentinels is finally playing again in this. And Sentinels was a very interesting org, because I brought up how in early Overwatch there were some CSGO orgs that wanted to come make their name in Overwatch. And they were like tier 2. They were smaller ones. I feel like Sentinels sort of fits that same bill here for Valorant, where reportedly they came and they grabbed the Overwatch League MVP, the grand final winner Sinatra. They grabbed like Shazam, a very well-known CS player.
They have Booga as well.
That's right. They have. Wait, is Booga actually competing for them?
I don't think in this tournament.
No, not in this tournament, but like Sentinels.
Oh yeah. But I meant specifically like as we move into them in Valorant. But yes, they also have Booga. But it still wasn't like I wouldn't really describe them as like some sort of staple of esports orgs.
No.
Right? Like they're sort of an up and comer.
And they're up and coming because they have a lot of money and they throw it at people.
And also, and in particular, something that really put them on the map was Booga.
Yes.
So that's like definitely where they've been trying to project themselves. And I feel like that is where we sit with Sentinels and heading into this tournament, is that this is a squad meant to grab attention. And we talked earlier about the return of investment for some of these orgs that have thrown their weight behind Valorant, and Sentinels is reportedly, along with like T1, just throwing money at this squad, which is mind-boggling. It's been actually a pretty widely held belief for a lot of, more mainstream esport critics, like, Monte Cristo has said a lot about this too, is that these salaries are ridiculous. And I've talked to GMs of other squads that have said like they've already been priced out of Valorant by like Sentinels and like T1 because they throw crazy salaries at what a game, but we don't have any measure of where it's going to be. The viewership isn't insane for our tournaments yet. We don't even have spec tools for like our tournaments at all. Like where's going to be? That's why also I'm worried about Valorant, is that we've put so much into it early for these orgs. Like, where do they get it back?
Yes.
They're hoping they're going to get it back, but that's all.
I mean, isn't that the question of esports as a whole?
It is, but I would say Valorant is unique.
That's the question that we don't ask
because
around
here. There's no at least like starting funnel of money for Valorant yet, right?
Yeah.
At least for other franchise leagues or more established stuff like League of Legends, CS:GO, like there's a clear basis that something is there. We don't know how we're gonna monetize it, but it's there. Like we don't know how we're gonna extract money, but we can sort of start. We can tout high viewership for sponsors.
I got an idea.
Things.
We extract money through $70 skins.
$70 skins, of course. Wait, I mean, if that's their plan, is to integrate our skins into our esports system, which I think Sage does that, and CS:GO does that a bit.
Sage?
Yeah, Rainbow Six Siege.
Siege?
Sage.
I was gonna say,
I was like,
Sage
am
or
I
Siege?
going
A
crazy?
siege.
What
A
game
siege.
are you talking about?
I mixed it up. Okay, my brain is getting
The
addled.
walls, it just all started to mesh
My
together.
brain is getting addled here a bit. But the point is, like, there are integrations you can have with the base game to support your esports scene. And also, Dota 2 has
And I would-
the
yeah,
continuity and
yes.
stuff. So there's a lot of options, right? But once again, I'm just worried when I look at all this money thrown into the orgs and where it's going.
Do we know if the money that they're throwing around is larger than the CS:GO salaries? Because CS:GO salaries
I
are
would say,
infamously
I would
high.
say for some of these particular squads, like the big ones that I just mentioned, like Sentinel stuff, the money has purportedly been comparable.
That's worrying.
Comparable.
I'll be honest,
I mean, like,
That's a lot.
it is, and I don't like to necessarily compare Fortnite directly to things like this because it's so hard to even try to estimate the way that those games play. But there were a lot of organizations that did get hurt by Fortnite. I was covering kind of the early stages of that through different series and whatnot. And the biggest problem that a lot of organizations got into was that they threw tons of money. I don't know how comparable salaries were. I don't think it was nearly as high as what we're talking right now. But a lot of organizations just said, okay, said player is good, cool, we're grabbing him for this team. And a lot of those didn't work out, and a lot of those guys aren't even in Fortnite anymore. So that's something that, for me, kind of from prior experience, does worry me. And when it comes down to these tournaments as well, the return on investment is something that they're thinking about, and I'm interested to see exactly how long it takes for the Valorant esports scene to kind of keep up. Do we see these organizations stick around in terms of what players they have grabbed, what teams that they're looking to do, or do they start to downsize as well?
And also, others have been much more reasonable, supposedly. It's like, I've been told that many other orgs have been much more reasonable. So they're just kind of leading the pack of like setting the standard of just crazy return. And also, you have to take into account that a lot of these people are creators at the same time while being players. And being a creator, I would argue, is probably one of the only aspects in esports that truly is sort of a kind of an independent factor of, yes, you deserve more money, because a creator inherently will create more overall brand awareness and return on investment, I think, than any just basic player on their own is being a creator, So I do think that's important to buy. But more importantly than all the money, well, not more importantly, but equally as importantly as all the money stuff, is their actual results. So I'm just going to talk about Sentinels again, because why not? I'm familiar with them, but like, we haven't seen them compete in a long time, and the last time they competed, the results were mediocre. They were middling at best, and now they're finally playing in their first big tournament. T1 has been absent as well. Like the latest in a squad tournament was the Immortals one, the first light, and TSM won that. TSM's been looking really good, and now this is the chance that T1 is not only hosting this tournament, but their squad is going to be playing it. Now it's complete, and Sentinel's also another big name currently, but we have to see where they're going to be, is going to competing too. And I think you were talking earlier about how, or someone brought up earlier how potentially, it was a news article. Yeah, we saw a news article actually just break how 100 Thieves might have finalized its roster, potentially acquisition, to build around Hiko. And I have to ask, moving in, should we have any sort of confidence in any of these squads that I just mentioned? Like, let's say if 100 Thieves ends up playing, or T1 or Sentinels, or should we just bandwagon and be like, okay, TSM's probably going to win it again, or TSM, or maybe Gen G or something like that, Like, what are we feeling around the table?
I mean, I'll say this, like, from your guys' perspective, like, do you almost rely on, like, it's kind of hard for me to kind of compare, because it's like you do have players on a majority of these teams that do come from different backgrounds. I mean, you have guys that are headlining different teams that are from Apex Legends, guys that are from Overwatch, guys that are a majority of the time are from Counter-Strike. Like, do you guys put a whole lot of weight into that transferring over as soon as the game comes out, to the point where it's like, okay, this guy has to be the top player? Like, we're talking about Sentinels, for example, Sinatra to be specific. Like, do you put a lot of weight in his ability from what you've seen in Overwatch to instantly translate to allow for them to be a top team? Or,
we saw this in Overwatch, and like we usually refer to them as like Gen 1 pros and Gen 2 pros. So the Gen 1 pros are always going to be people who are pros or semi-pros in previous games, just because they have a huge amount of transferable experience in terms of the actual mechanics. But now that esports is actually mature enough, we're also getting veterans of the esports scene in terms of like Sinatra. So Sinatra is somebody who is known for his toxicity and being kind of an immature individual earlier on. He has since, with his experience on Selfless, playing with like players like Emong, that veteran helped Sinatra mature, and then Sinatra, from all accounts, is a fantastic teammate these days and on San Francisco Shock. So when you do have somebody like Sinatra, who is kind of consistent to be like, dedicated to esports for a long term, even if he's not going to be number one out of the gate, the mentality to keep going just past natural talent. He obviously has a lot of talent, but he's also super hardworking. So even if he's not kind of out of the gate this like massive crazy prodigy, there are countless stories of esports prodigies going in and then just flaming out. And it is like, esports is very volatile. There's a lot of people who grind really hard, and then if they stop practicing 12 hours a day, they can no longer maintain kind of world-class level stuff. So at the very start, definitely my money is towards the people who are established esports pros. And then really, I don't think we're going to start seeing new guys being able to compete until they can start getting on teams with veterans and actually learning more about how to be a successful esports pro in the long term. You'll definitely have flares of brilliance. Sometimes just the stars align and you have some really exciting squads. And not, especially it's going to come down to one of the things that we've been talking about contested a lot is going to be, the staff and the infrastructure.
Which are very, very little currently.
Yes.
At all.
It
There's
does
almost
not
no
exist.
infrastructure or staff. I mean,
which is
for
going
almost
to
any
put
team.
more emphasis on the people who do have experience with esports teams that are extremely successful, like the San Francisco Shock. So somebody who knows how a successful team operates is going to probably bring that knowledge into their team. Whereas if you take 5 really talented people, you don't have anyone kind of mediating the personalities, leading the improvement, the performance, or anything like that. Those are minefields. Those are minefields that the esports pros have walked and know how to avoid. So definitely, my money is on the people who have the most esports experience.
I'm personally leaning towards, if you're from CS and if you're successful in CS, which a lot of these players are, you have a huge head start. And just because on a pure mechanics level, but also just the way that the game operates. Because at its core, even though Valorant has changed and putting on some, changed some how it looks, it's still, you have smokes, you got flashes, you got nades, and you shoot people. And you hold angles.
Yes.
And you take sites and you hold sites. And you defuse a bomb. You plant a bomb. So I do think that like CS at its whole, all the players coming over, and it's why I'm particularly excited for T1 again to compete, because they're also one of the few teams that also has a coach. They have Fraud, who is another ex-CS player, very talented, had a very good career, very talented. I mean, their finalized roster is really scary. I've been told from a lot of people that T1 is expected to come in and be really good on the level of like TSM, and TSM just won the last Immortals Last Light tournament,
and they went like what
6-0, yeah, 6-0, and they're really, really good. They are sort of taking the scene by storm. I think that there's a lot of emergent teams that I'm going to be on the lookout for. I think T1, TSM, Gen.G, Immortals. Those are like my North American rosters that I'm really interested in watching in the tournament, because C9, they just added their second. It's Skylar. There's a lot of backwards name people in Valorant, by the way, because TSM also has Cutler, but it's backwards.
Yeah.
So but there is definitely a lot of. I just don't feel big on that roster yet, but these rosters still, the most notable thing, especially also when we're looking at it, did I put Immortals in that list?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, also I should throw Immortals on that list because they also have a lot of tier 2 like MDL CS people, and they have a finalized coaching staff as well. I mean, they're the only currently right now that has like essentially a full staff around them, because not full, but they have like Gunba, who was a Overwatch coach for the LA Valiant, who's now an assistant coach for them, and then Packing 10, who is now the head coach for the Valiant Overwatch League team, also gets in a GM role and is now going to be both GM and head coach for their Valorant team. So this man's wearing 4 different hats. It's a lot of different hats, but they've had a lot of success and they're building a structure early. But the whole point of looking at all these top teams for the most part are those that are filled with a lot of CS people, a lot of CS people or endemic Valorant people, which I think is extremely important too, because we've seen this, and I'm sure. I'm not as sure about COD, because as the COD community, has there really been a lot of emergent stars, or mostly just people traveling from iteration to iteration of COD?
No, it's over the last few seasons, it has been very quick amateur to pro rated. It's like the average age of a professional player has dramatically decreased.
Pretty much the players that have started out in this particular game have risen to the top, as opposed to some of the older players on average.
I would say, like, in terms of this game specifically, no, but like in terms of amateurs that have existed for the last season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, that have kind of gotten, that are around the 17, 18, 19 year margin, they're kind of finally starting to get a chance with franchising, and they've kind of turned in quickly to a majority of how a lot of the rosters.
So you would still describe them as more like endemic to this more recent iterations of Call of Duty? Okay, yeah. And that's how I feel about the Valorant rosters too. So when I look at all those aforementioned rosters, they're either filled with legends of CS, with T1 and such, or tier 2 CS players with Immortals, or even even the squads like we see on TSM, or endemic Valorant players, which we've also seen start to emerge on all of these different rosters. And that's where I'm feeling like that's the sweet spot. And I don't like Sentinels on that list quite as much, because sure, they have Sinatra, but their results were pretty mad to start out with. And like they have some CS people, but they still don't have a structure involved. And they even have more than just Overwatch people. They have like an Apex Legends player technically with Zoms.
Yes.
So I do think that this weird mix of being on top isn't always the best, maybe in the long run, right? As we watch the game exist, but also we've seen for every other esport title, the older pros almost always get outcompeted by the newer people coming up through the ranks. Like Overwatch has that. You just give an example of Call of Duty. I do think that it's tough to keep a very top-heavy system in esports unless it is designed that way. Like for COD, for a good example, or even CS, it's really hard. And Dota, I think, is another great example of this, where there's much of the best players have been the best players for a long time. And it takes a while to filter that out because they just have so many more advantages of getting in early and having the support early. And if you don't have an incredibly robust system of making it up there, then you're probably just going to stick around for a while. And I do think that's where this Valorant could run into an issue, is like if they have a very robust system like they want to do with the Ignition series, where it's like sort of engaging with all the orgs, endemic players are kind of going to rise to the top pretty quickly, because the 16, 17-year-old guys that are going to play like 80 hours, 20 hours a day, they'll likely outcompete the guy that's 26 that's like, man, I do like playing, I do like practicing, but I also like to go outside and like do stuff. Like I like to do other things other than just play 20 hours a day. And that's why those particular rosters for me look a lot scarier than just having someone from a top esport title necessarily, especially if they were CS oriented first. That's how I'm feeling about it, at least. But we'll just have to see.
We will have to see.
We'll just have to see how the results for that lands. But that's my prediction. I'm just gonna make my prediction. I think TSM wins it. Okay.
Okay. Oh,
I think
there it
TSM
is.
wins
All
it.
right.
That's my prediction for it. So if you want to throw out your own, you can, or you can just copy off mine because I'm pretty cool.
I'm Captain Hindsight. That way I can never be wrong. So no predictions. for
No
me.
predictions. I think
I'm just gonna
TSM.
watch and enjoy and see what happens.
Wardell, who is like their team captain figure, he's got cannonball delts and he's going to carry them to a victory. So I'm feeling Wardell.
Okay.
for a
I will
quick
say
victory.
I am
looking forward to it.
at the least very interested to see how T1 plays, just because this roster does have a lot of hype around them. Just kind of granted, with the announcements, the players that they've added, obviously Skadoodle's a big name coming in from CS previously, so I don't know. And then players like Brax being considered like the best player, so I don't know. I think. I don't really have like an expert opinion to be like, oh yeah, this team for sure is the front runner. But I think like TSM, Immortals, T1 are definitely kind of the three rosters that I'm looking at the most. And I think that, like I said, this tournament's going to be really interesting to kind of see exactly what the kind of next conversation is after this. Like I think we're going to learn a lot of information after this tournament.
Yeah, we need to see where the scene's at and see where our rosters sit at. And there's still a chance for maybe this new 100 Thieves roster to go in there because they still have two teams they need to invite. But I think the general trend for me right now in Valorant is not just observing all the teams and sort of getting this insider knowledge, but seeing where is this scene going, like right now. If this T1 tournament happens and it has very mad viewership and you have some of your most premier rosters with your stars that should draw outside eyes that aren't even interested in Valorant, then I have to be like, well, what's our end goal here, right? Where are we going to go from here? Exactly.
I mean, there's a couple things here because there's a whole bunch of different ways that they can like inflate their viewership. They can have Twitch front page, which is going to give them 10,000 views easy. There's different ways. I don't think that expecting big off the bat.
I'm not expecting big. I think if you can hit about 30 to 40, ideally.
You think they'll hit 30 to 40?
If you can hit 30 to 40, then that shows to me that there is enough healthy, because this is all the major team names and brands for the most part.
And you also, and I don't know 100% sure like all the details around this. Ninja is playing in this.
Yeah, there is Team Ninja.
That's going to inflate things a very fair amount.
That's true. So if you have Ninja in there and you don't have 30 to 40 and he's allowed to stream on Twitch, then that's a problem, right? And if all of those viewers are concentrated on Ninja's stream, then that's still a problem, I think.
Especially if it's his like one of his first. I don't know his stream schedule, obviously, what's kind of going on with that. But if it is Twitch and that tournament is the debut, I personally was a part of a stream whenever Ninja first made it over to Mixer. Like our viewership that we had for that tournament in terms of like what was the average dramatically increased by like, let's say 15,000 to like 40,000. And that was solely our stream, not anything related to him. Like I said, I don't know about those viewership numbers, how that affects, but I think that will definitely, depending on where he's at, will dramatically.
I did forget that Ninja was in
that
this
is a
tournament.
big. That is a big one. Yeah, that
we
is
don't
a
know the
big
other
one.
But that
teams as well.
again,
We talk about Shroud,
I guess you could even consider that in the same thing that I was saying about like ways to inflate your viewership, right? That's the sort of thing where you like the Riot guys, Valorant community is going to be like, oh, our esport is so popular. Look at how many viewers we got. When the same sort of thing happens. It's like it's either it's front page or it's people are watching because of Ninja or things like that. And unless those are kind of consistent aspects of your esports, you can't really claim them to be that those viewers are because of the esport. So, it's like with the Rivalcade series or the monthly melees that happened in Overwatch, I think that it's good that this is part of the Ignition series and it will be happening more than once sort of thing. Because
Which is a good initiative.
It is a good initiative because you absolutely do need to have these consistent tournaments. And I think that more important than wherever they start out with, obviously, if you have like 3 viewers, that's not going to be good. There's going to be a range, but the more important factor here is the fact that it's a watchable, enjoyable experience, and they're going to have growth month to month, week to week. I think that's more important than trying to inflate viewers for that first tournament, because unless you're going to be using those tactics every single time you run a tournament, it's just going to make your viewership's declining.
Yeah. And having a built-up system too, where you engage with your grassroots, is really important, since you can actually set up a robust system to sort of go from amateur to pro, and also there isn't this huge barrier of cost to entry. There's a lot easier to sort of work your way up, and intermixing tier 1 competition with like tier 2 or even tier 3 competition through like a tournament style system is often a much healthier way to increase your viewership naturally than trying to do embeds or other things like that. So, but overall, I'm excited for the tournament. I will be the one to take a hard stand. So then, if I'm wrong, they will come for me. But I feel like TSM is like still a very good favorite to win it, because I also just a huge fan of Wardell. But it's really exciting to me to watch the game continue to develop from like a team play perspective too, because you can already see even from the beginning of when the first series were launched that it's gotten a lot tighter in terms of how teams are executing, because CS-style attack shooters are just very much based around, we take a site, we hold angles on the site for the retake, and like the tighter you are, the better you are at holding these angles and knowing when it rotates and know how to use your utilities, the generally on average the best you look, because there's not like this huge amount of strategic depth necessarily. It's all about the execution, and you're already seeing the evolution of these teams just from the initial weeks of the launch. So I do think it's really exciting for us to keep an eye out on these squads and see if they're continuing to look kind of amateur or if they're starting to look really professional, like moving forward. And that's really, for me, where the Invitational is going to stand. It's just, what's our viewership? What are our teams looking like? And
I think the thing that I'll be looking forward to most weekend, I haven't found a team that I'm going to cheer for yet. Envy doesn't have a Valorant team yet. So, by the way, if you want to make a case for which team I should cheer for, let me know in the comments, because I'm looking for a flag to fly.
He's indecisive. He's indecisive. He can't fall in love with cannonball delts like myself.
I mean, Gen G is an entirely Canadian team.
I think it's mostly French Canadian, but yes, Canadian.
Yeah, that's definitely a breaking point for me.
Yeah.
So there's a reason I'm already not dressed up in Gen G gear going like, woo, because French. But joking.
It's okay. French people are welcome here.
Disclaimer really quick. No.
Disclaimer. We'll allow French.
But yeah, I think one of the things that I've been, in terms of playing Valorant, I'm not going to be the kind of person who grinds a lot of Valorant, because it is like the gunplay, beautifully made, super intricate and in-depth. It's not the kind of game that I like. I like the tactics and the strategy thing. So with these teams starting to develop and starting to more mature and kind of higher professional tactics and level of play, that's going to be what I'm looking forward to this weekend, is that the discussion and conversation about how in-depth this game can get outside of gunplay into more of like the tactics and the strategy around sites and all of that. That's really what I'm going to be looking forward to this weekend. And if some team comes out with really unique play or really unique tactics, strategies, executions, I think they're going to make me fall in love with them pretty quickly.
Anything you're looking out for, Lando?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of what you guys have both said, really is kind of what I'm looking forward to. I'm just looking forward to see, kind of like I said, it's kind of like the opportunity for Valorant up to this early stage of competitive to kind of have the spotlight on it, to kind of showcase what exactly this game is going to look like. And I think from not only a broadcast side, but also kind of like you mentioned, the player side, I'm interested to see how polished these teams are, exactly how the abilities kind of work in cohesion with one another given the recent updates. So I'm just personally excited just to watch what probably is considered, in terms of North America, the highest level of competition that we've seen, mixed in with a lot of different additives in terms of new rosters, in terms of certain media stars being involved, guys like Ninja as well. So I think this will be kind of a very interesting way to look at Valorant for the future, and that's mostly what I'm excited about, is just to kind of see exactly where we are right now, and from this to see what happens next.
Well, we've sort of done a lot of circling back and forth a long time, because that's what we love to do amongst us, is circle. But we have sort of reached our natural conclusion. We're all hyped leading into the T1 tournament. We've done a little bit of discussion about the general state of the game and everything. I think overall, I'm very happy with our first installment of Before the Switch.
Yeah,
I think I'm quite happy with this. We're gonna put Lando in the middle next time.
Okay,
though.
I'm down
So
for
then
it.
we can
So
just
it doesn't
look at
become
him.
mini contested.
So we can look at him and balance, but we're probably gonna put him somewhere like that. But overall, I think it's a really exciting point for us to see where Valorant continues from this point, how the tournament's going to run out for the T1 Invitational and the Ignition Series as a whole, moving forward into Valorant Esports launching fully. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you have anything that you would like us to touch, you can always drop them in the comments below, and we always take a look at those just to see, like, is there anything that we missed out? Is there anything we should talk about later? But that has been the first episode of Before the Switch with Jayne, with Lando, and with myself, Avast, and thank you guys for tuning in.